You're listening to This Week in America with Rick Bratton.
Welcome back, everybody. This Week in America, website thisweekinamerica.us. Great to have you with us on the program today. As mentioned, back with us on the show, Christopher Kelly. He's the former chairman of the Chyron Corporation and a retired television executive. He's had a lifelong passion for military history. Many of his family have fought in previous American wars, including one. Stephen Rensselaer of New York led an ill-fated invasion of Canada, which was included in Christopher's first book, which we talked about in This Week in America. America Invades, how we've invaded or been militarily involved with almost every country on Earth. We're talking about the new book co-written by Christopher and Stuart Laycock called Italy Invades, How Italians Conquered the World. Christopher, welcome back to the program. It's great to have you with us.
Great to be with you, Rick.
So much in the book, and my question would be, and you talk about this at the beginning of the book, when you said to friends, this is what I'm going to write about next, when Italy invades, and people go, that's got to be like the shortest book ever written. And when you go through this, it's like, wow, there really is a rich military history there, isn't there?
There really is. Going back, we looked at Roman Italy in a broad sense, going back to the Romans, going back even to some extent to the Etruscans. There is really a very long military history that the Italians have been involved with in one way or the other, that has touched almost every part of the world.
In fact, when you look at that, what they've been involved in at least 50 countries, that's 26% of the world, so many countries in a peacekeeping role as well, which we will talk about on the program. The book is Italy Invades, How Italians Conquered the World. With us, one of the authors, Christopher Kelly. The website is very simple, ItalyInvades.com. Let's go back and talk about some of those early days, the role that Italian explorers played in the Middle Ages and century afterwards. Very crucial to the history of Europe.
Sure. Well, of course, Christopher Columbus has become a lightning rod in terms of controversy in recent years. I mean, you've even had protests about and people who have been talking about renaming Columbus Day to various other things as well. But there's no doubt that Columbus had an enormous impact on and really changed our world in many, many ways. There was what they called the Columbian Exchange that changed things. And Columbus, of course, was from Genoa, so he had a direct Italian connection. Both of his parents were Genoese. His father was a miller. So, and there were many other explorers that were also had Italian connections as well.
The book is meticulously researched. Were you surprised as you were doing the research? When you went in, did you think you were going to find as many rich little nuggets of history as you were able to come up with in the book Italy Invades?
We were pleasantly surprised to find out things about really every country on Earth had some kind of Italian connection. I mean, well, there are some that clearly there are some countries that Italy hasn't invaded, but nevertheless, Italy's had an impact on Japan, for example. Italy hasn't invaded Japan, but I mean, they've even found Roman artifacts in Japan. Now they're probably due to trading rather than, of course, invasion or anything like that. But also, Japan fought 2 world wars allied to Italy as well, and has had connection. Japan even sent ships in World War I to the Mediterranean to help out against the Austrians, for example. So you have connections really with Italy all over the world.
Christopher Kelly, our guest on This Week in America, author of the new book, Italy Invades, How Italians Conquered the World. Christopher Kelly, along with Stuart Laycock. Second time Chris has been back on the program. Information on the first book is available, of course, at our website, thisweekinamerica.us. And it's interesting, sort of indirectly, the role that Italians have played. You point out in World War II, but 1 out of 12 in the U.S. military were of Italian descent.
That's right. We talk about not just about Italians and Romans and different aspects of Italy, but also about Italian Americans. That 1 out of 12, I mean, there were 16 million Americans that served in World War II, and 1 out of 12 of those had Italian heritage. So, and we talk about some of the more prominent ones, John Basilone, who was in the U.S. Marines, who won the Medal of Honor at Guadalcanal and was later killed at the first wave on Iwo Jima, who was featured in The Pacific, that was a miniseries done by Spielberg, is just kind of one of the more prominent examples. There's a photograph of a statue from Raritan, New Jersey, which celebrates John Basilone Day every year.
The book is called Italy Invades. It's interesting, too, as I'm reading it. I had no idea the rich heritage, really Italians at the forefront in terms of military science and engineering.
Right, and leadership as well. Napoleon had an Italian connection. Both of his parents were Genoa belonged, Corsica, the island of Corsica in which he was born, belonged to the Genoese, and it was only traded the year before his birth in 1768. He was born in 1769. So both of his parents were Genoese. He grew up speaking Italian. I mean, his name is Italian. You think about Napoleon, it means Leone, it means lion, and Napoli is Naples. So he means Lion of Naples, which doesn't sound very French to me. So he also later became the king of Italy, and many Italians served with him. Many of them fought under the Napoleonic Eagle from Russia to Moscow.
I mentioned
Russia to Madrid.
The role of Italian descendants in World War II. American Pentagon, there's a story involving Italy as well.
There are all kinds of connections between America and the U.S. The Pentagon, which of course is that icon of American military power, has an Italian connection and is based upon fortification design that was done by the Italians in the Renaissance of the star fortification system. And Michelangelo used this to help to defend Florence, for example, in the 15th century. So the Pentagon was modeled on an Italian design, so to speak.
Christopher Kelly, our guest on This Week in America, co-author of the new book, Italy Invades. Keeping with the U.S. theme, Little Bighorn. Talk about the significance of that.
Sure. There was a guy named Giovanni Martini, and he was one of 6 Italians, not Italian Americans, but actual born in Italy Italians, who served in the 7th Cavalry with Custer. And he was at the Battle of Little Bighorn in 1876, and he was Custer's bugler, and he carried Custer's very last message out at the end of the battle. That message is preserved today at the West Point Museum in New York. Can be found there, and it was reproduced in the photo section of our book. So as a result, Martini ended up surviving the battle, was of course one of the very few to do so, and he was later. So the battle took place in 1876. Martini died in 1922 after being hit by a beer truck in Brooklyn, I'm afraid.
Okay, that's an interesting ending there. Just one of the many stories you'll find in the book, Italy Invades. The nice thing is it's very easy if you want to skip over and go to different countries and find the Italian influence. You can do that. It's very easy to read, very well laid out. Excellent pictures, as Chris talked about. The book is Italy Invades, website italyinvades.com. Something interesting is talking about papal invasions and the Pope's machine gun. Tell the audience about that. Sure.
Well, some readers and listeners may be surprised to learn that the Pope had an army and forces of his own. The Papal States was a secular force that the Pope had up until 1870. So the Pope had an army and soldiers that were defending his territory, and that didn't come to an end until 1870. Which was when, and it was actually the Italians that invaded the forces from the Kingdom of Italy that invaded the Vatican area, what were the Papal States at the time, and the Papal armies had something called a Claxton gun, which was actually an American gun, and it was a prototype of a Gatling gun, and they had this stationed at the Giovanni Gate in Rome, San Giovanni Gate, and it didn't prevent the Italians from taking over Rome, which they did in 1870. And then since that time, of course, the Pope has essentially had no secular power. Obviously has tremendous spiritual power all over the world, but he doesn't, the Pope, he has the Swiss Guards, but he no longer has an army, so to speak.
And you talk about Pope Francis, a product of an Italian invasion. Interesting story there as well.
That's right. That Pope Francis is I mean, he was born in Argentina, but he of Italian parents. And he grew up speaking Italian. There are many Italians in Argentina, as well as, of course, Italians in North America, Central America, all over. But the Pope has a direct Italian connection. I mean, he is, in a sense, I've written elsewhere that, I mean, the Pope is Italian in the same sense that Napoleon was Italian. I mean, having Italian ethnic origin, even though obviously the Napoleon was also French, Corsican, and the Pope, of course, is Argentinian too.
Talk about Italy in World War II and the dramatic, basically, transformation after World War II.
Yes, I mean, Mussolini tried to revive the glory of ancient Rome and to be a conqueror in the style of ancient Rome, which obviously did not work out very well for Italy or for Mussolini. He invaded many countries, invaded Albania, invaded Ethiopia in the 1930s. And of course, during the course of the war, they invaded Greece, invaded places like Monaco. Actually, he even invaded Monaco in 1943 as well. So, and also British Egypt in 1940 as well. So, but the Italians were really not fully prepared for the start of World War II. They had no aircraft carriers, and their ships had no radar either. So they were laboring at a significant disadvantage. And they had assumed, I think Mussolini had assumed that Hitler was just about to win the war when France was just about to fall when they jumped in June of 1940. But he did not calculate on the fact that they were taking on the largest industrial nations in the world with fighting against the United States of America, the British Empire, and the Soviet Union as well.
And that left the country pretty much politically divided, didn't it? It
did. I mean, you had, in 1943, the Americans invaded, went in through Sicily, and then landed on the toe of Italy and at Anzio. And the Italian government fell and then was replaced. And then, I mean, basically World War II degenerated into a civil war in Italy. And you had the partisans fighting on the Allied side, and you had Italian forces called the co-belligerent forces that were also fighting on the Allied side. But there were also still this element in the north of fascists that were still supportive of Mussolini right up until the end to 1945 and VE Day.
Christopher Kelly, our guest on This Week in America, along with Stuart Laycock, author of the new book, Italy Invades, How Italians Conquered the World. The website is italyinvades.com. The book is available all across the country. Information, of course, and you can link on directly by going to our website, thisweekinamerica.us. And interesting, the transformation, as I mentioned, the country after World War II sort of gave them a chance to go back to their heritage. And you talk about that. Pizza is worldwide. Italian design is worldwide. You'll find Ferraris in Singapore really went back and discovered who they were as a country, didn't they?
Right. I mean, they did kind of beat their swords into plowshares and became a nation that is exporting products all over the world, exporting from Ferraris to Chianti to design products, fashion, of course, all kinds of things all over the world. But they also have a military role too. I mean, they're a substantial military power even to this day. I mean, for instance, the Royal Navy in Britain has no aircraft carriers, but the Italian Navy has 2 aircraft carriers in service today, the Garibaldi and the Cavour. And they also have a fairly substantial air force. In this year, in 2015, you've seen Italian fighters in action over the Baltic states, based out of Latvia, that have intercepted Russian planes that have been playing kind of cat and mouse with NATO forces, for example.
And I mentioned before the role of peacekeeper. Talk about that, because they really are an important part of peacekeeping, literally all across the globe.
Right. They have been involved in 2010, they were involved in 22 different nations in terms of peacekeeping. So you have the Italians that jump in terms of peacekeeping and do the blue helmets of the UN forces and have been all over the world. I mean, even in the Korean War, they didn't send troops to the Korean War in the 1950s, but they sent a MASH unit to participate. So you had Italian doctors helping to stitch guys up on the United Nations side.
I know a book that you're working on, and I'd love to talk about that. The name Thomas Wells comes up, and I think we briefly mentioned that the last time you were with us on the program. Talk about his story. It's a relative. Here's a gentleman in 1914 who basically is trapped in a country where he does not want to be. Talk about the story of Thomas Wells.
Sure. Thomas Towson Wells was my maternal great-grandfather, my mother's grandfather. And he was a New York lawyer, and he was also the American consul to Romania. And in 1914, and we have this excerpted in the back of the book, and actually I'm planning to bring the full book out next year. And what he wrote is a little tract called an adventure in 1914, and he was traveling just with his family, with his wife and two kids, in Europe in the summer of 1914, and he was in this places like the Swiss Alps and in Austria and northern Italy, and he was there at the time that World War I broke out, and he was even briefly arrested and accused of being a Russian spy, which he wasn't, of course, and he had to manage to talk his way out of that. He was threatened with execution, immediate execution, actually, as a spy. So it's kind of an interesting story that we included, and I just thought it would be, and he talks about Italy and how here he's writing in 1914, predicting that Italy is likely to come in on the war of the side of the Allies, and Wells turned out to be prophetic about that.
Love to have you back when that book is completed. And a minute or so left in the program. I have to ask, I mentioned in the beginning that you were a former chairman of the Chyron Corporation. Boy, talk about history. As someone who grew up in the television industry, Chyron, that's what everybody wished for. And I think it was what the first mobile graphic system used by Roone Arledge, ABC Sports. That's a bit of history there with you literally changed how graphics are used on television.
That's right. I mean, Chyron does graphics for television. They still do them to this day. As you mentioned, Monday Night Football, they were pioneers with Monday Night Football. They do sports graphics all over the world to this, and they do television, all over the world for people who are interested in live, real-time graphics.
And earned a number of Emmys along the way. But the reason we're here is to talk about the new book, Italy Invades. What's it been like actually finishing the book, seeing people read it, enjoy it, asking you questions? You've been out doing book signing, actually talking to groups. What kind of feedback are you getting? Because I'm sure that after they get over that initial surprise, it's like, well, this country really did have a significant impact militarily on our history.
Right. Well, I think that, it is kind of a feel-good book for Italian Americans, I would say. It shows them a lot of their history, some of which they might not be aware of. But also, it's of interest for anybody who's interested in history as well and wants to know about the impact of Italy and on our world to this day.
Very well researched and very well written, because as you're reading, history comes alive. The book is called Italy Invades, How Italians Conquered the World. Christopher Kelly's been back with us on This Week in America, wrote the book along with Stuart Laycock. Christopher, it's great to have you back with us on the program. Look forward to your next work. Thank you so much for being with us on the show.
Great, Rick. Thanks very much for your time.
You're welcome. Once again, the book is called Italy Invades, How Italians Conquered the World. Website, ItalyInvades.com. Of course, information you can log on directly by going to our website, thisweekinamerica.us.